Welcome to this second tutorial on conditionals. The first tutorial, the introductory one, just covered the basics, Boolean expressions, very simple if-else statements, and just kind of an initial approach to understanding the syntax and how to think through those basic scenarios. This one, we're going to talk more about the logical operators. We'll look at them individually, but then we're going to look at them in combination with one another. And we will also look at more complex logic. We'll look at nested conditionals, and then just really focus on the idea of, how do we process through this in a way that sets the logic so that the computer can follow things the same way we kind of do it in a split second in our head. But we have to do this very methodically and with the right syntax and in the right order, so that the computer can do all that same reasoning. So and there's lots of different ways to write complex conditionals. You can take different approaches and have the same result. So I'm going to talk about all of that. If you want to take a look at this README, you can. It's actually the same as the one from the first tutorial. It really just covers the basics of the syntax and the concepts here. If you've already read it, then I think you'll be good to go. Okay, so let's start up here and talk about the logical operators first. I want to look at the not operator. And we have this example. By the way, your starter code is probably going to have some of this code already written for you, and that's okay, because I only have certain portions where I really want you to stop and try to do it yourself. But I want to live code this for you so that I can kind of talk about it as I do it. So we'll start with the first one. Someone's offering you a chocolate bar. The first thing you want to check is if it's milk chocolate or dark chocolate, and that matters to you because you're lactose intolerant. So let's say let is dark chocolate. And let's just say that, you check it out and it's actually milk chocolate. So is dark chocolate is false. We could write a conditional to have different responses depending on whether this is dark or not. And remember, I covered this in the first tutorial, but remember that when you have something that already evaluates to true or false, you don't need to explicitly use an equality operator and say something like, is strictly equal to true or whatever. You can just do is dark chocolate because that is already going to evaluate to either true or false. Okay, so we'll say if it's dark chocolate, then we want to log something, my favorite. How did you know? Otherwise, so this is where we write the else. Console.log. No thanks. I'm a bit lactose intolerant. Okay. If you are lactose intolerant, you know that actually can make a difference, the milk chocolate or the dark chocolate. So it's possible to do this the other way around. You can actually use the bang operator. So this is where the not operator comes in to lead with that negative case. In this case, we were leading with the positive case, is just using it straight. If is dark chocolate is true. So you can pause the video if you'd like to do this on your own. Otherwise, you can just code along with me. Here we go. So in this case, we'll say if is not dark chocolate by using that bang right up there on the front. And then we will set this up in the opposite order. In this case, we want to say no thanks if this evaluates to true, so that if not is dark chocolate. And in this, the second case will be the opposite, which is, if it is dark chocolate. So either one of these is a perfectly valid approach, and it really just depends on, how, kind of what direction you're headed and what your preferences are. It really does not matter. We will talk more later on in this tutorial about, when the order does matter. So let's talk about the and operator real fast here. So we're going to get into this a kind of a longer theme here. We're going to abandon the dark chocolate and we're going to go into sandwich making. And we're going to start off just by saying you're making a sandwich. You're not sure you have all the ingredients you need. You know, at minimum, you need some bread and some meat if you want to have some deli sandwich, right? So we can check for both these conditions at the same time with the and operator. And I want to start out with some variables that I need. I say, okay, I need to know if I have bread, and we'll initialize that to true, just, to test this out. And I also need to know if I have meat, and let's say that's false. And in this case, instead of console logging something inside the conditional, I'm going to say I have this other variable I want to set up, can make basic sandwich. And I'll set that to false as a default because I really can't say for sure whether I can make it until I can prove it by checking these two. So we don't need an else in this situation. We're only going to need an if. So I'll say if have bread. Oops, excuse me. So the whole point of this was to have multiple conditions. Got a little ambitious there with my closing parentheses. Okay, if have bread and have meat. That's what we want. Then we'll set can make basic sandwich to true and change the value. And now we can console log that just for the sake of seeing what this outcome is. And of course, we expect it to be false because while have bread is true, have meat is false. And both of these would have to be true because of the and operator in order for this entire expression to be true. Okay, so let's run this. And we get false. And I also see here that I didn't put in my, there we go. Helps to read everything if it's spread out a little bit in the console. Okay, so we have a good start there. Let's talk about the or operator. If you wanted to be more specific about the meats you're looking for, you could use the or operator because only one of them is needed for the sandwich. You can have ham or you can have turkey and you can still make a sandwich, right? So let's set up, oh, I already have the variable set up, I see. And so I've said, let's set this one to false, but let's set this one to true. And as long as I have one, the entire thing should be true. So have ham or have turkey. Then we'll say have meat equals true. Oops, just one equal sign there because we're just assigning that value. So we're changing the value from that was originally false to true just by checking to see whether we have ham or turkey. And so this one, it comes along, JavaScript says, okay, do we have ham? It's false. But because this is or, it says, okay, I'm not done. We might still get a true out of this. So let's check this one. Checks this one and it says it's true and it says, oh, okay, so one of these is true. Therefore, this entire expression is true. And so we'll change this to true. And then let's console log that just to prove it. My goodness, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my, there we go. Keeping everything lined up. Have meat. And so we'll just check that to make sure that it is in fact now true instead of false. And there it is. And there is a shorthand way to write this because if you're just setting a value for something, you can, excuse me, actually just set it directly without having to write an if block like that by saying have meat equals have ham or have turkey. And that's enough because that entire thing is a valid Boolean expression. And so it checks this one first and, says it's false. Well, in this case, of course, it's already true because we just changed it to true. But if you had not written this, let's say you hadn't written any of this, you can test this and, we can console log that again. And see that it has been changed to true because we set it this way. And of course, if we pull this back in, then it's already going to be true. So we'll have false, true, and true. Okay, now let's talk about combining logical operators. Because you can use these things together sometimes when you have slightly more complex logic that you need to try out, but you can still do it in one line. So what if you wanted to skip the have meat variable and just evaluate the logic all at once? Bread, ham, bread and ham or turkey. And then you don't have to use have meat. So let's try this out. We'll say if have bread and have ham or have turkey. Okay, and you'll notice that the way I have done these parentheses here is, to make sure these are grouped together, because JavaScript will evaluate these in a certain order, but you want to be explicit to make sure that it's clear that it's either have bread, it's either have ham or have turkey. And if that entire thing is true, then it's have bread and, the result of this entire expression. So just pay attention to that. And in some cases, it will matter when you use multiple operands like this. And so you want to make sure that, you've got it solidly defined in a way that there's no question what the order is supposed to be to prevent errors in your logic. So now I'm going to say, I can make a really dry deli sandwich. Because, just bread and meat, that's probably going to be pretty dry. I'm going to throw in a couple of line breaks here. Okay, and then we have the opposite case. So I'm going to do an else statement here. Console log. Clearly, I need to make a run to the grocery store. Okay, so let's run this. And it says, I can make a really dry deli sandwich. Yes, because at this point we know we may not have ham, but we do have turkey. So this entire thing is going to return true. And we do have bread. So true and true, the entire thing resolves to true. So it's going to print this first statement and not the second statement. Okay, now let's explore how you would combine some of these by using the not operator. So you saw a loaf of bread, but you didn't really pay close attention to what kind of bread it was. And you want to make sure it's something that'll actually work with, a deli sandwich like this. And so you want to say, if you have bread and the type of bread you have is not cinnamon swirl or white bread, then you're going to be happy and say, okay, this bread's going to work. So we're going to do this one a little differently. I'm going to actually do this based on checking strings. And I wanted to give kind of a variety of examples of ways that you evaluate things. And so, sometimes your variables that you're checking aren't Booleans already. They are strings, and you're looking for specific string values. So we'll say that the bread type is actually rye. And we'll say if have bread and again, we want to check the type of bread is not cinnamon swirl or white bread. So we can do kind of like we did here and say cinnamon, cinnamon or white bread, but we want to make sure it's not one of those. So this is where you want to use that not operator in front of this entire expression. And so you're going to put it in front of the parentheses, and then everything inside of the parentheses will be evaluated before that bang is applied. So here we'll say bread type, equals cinnamon swirl, or bread type equals white. Okay, if all of that resolves to true, then we'll just log something that says, oh, good. Looks like this spread will work. All right, so we've established that we have some turkey, we've got some rye bread, that's something that's nice and savory, probably better than turkey on cinnamon roll. Although, depends on your taste, I suppose. All right, so let's take this a step further and say that we have, another example of complex logic with multiple conditions. Maybe you have ham or turkey, and you also have bacon. And if so, you're going to make a club sandwich. Otherwise, it's just going to be a regular deli sandwich. But if you don't have deli meat and you do have bacon and you also have mayo, you're going to make a BLT. And you're already sure you've got lettuce and tomato. That part's not a problem. So you might think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of different things to think through. How do I approach this? One way that you can do this is to kind of pseudocode it, which means you write it out structured a little bit like the way you structure it with indenting and things, but you just write it in plain English. You don't worry about the syntax for the specific language that you're writing it in. So we could do a series of if-else statements. We could say, if there is ham or turkey, and if there is bacon, make a club sandwich. Else, if there is ham or turkey, but not bacon, then make a regular deli sandwich. Else, if there is bacon and mayo, make a BLT. Else, PB&J it is. Because if you don't have, ham or turkey or bacon, you're gonna just have to, settle for peanut butter and jelly. So that's one way to do it. We could also do it with nested conditionals. So this is where you actually put if statements inside other if statements. So pay attention to the indenting here. That's the key. If there is ham or turkey, then we're going to execute this part. Else, we're going to execute this part. And if you look at each of these individually, the logic is if there is bacon, make a club. Otherwise, make a regular deli sandwich. So because this is nested inside, this ham or turkey part is already taken care of. If we know that that part's true, that we have either ham or turkey, then we can proceed to just evaluate it on the basis of whether there's bacon or not. And then here we can say, okay, if we don't have ham or turkey, then we just need to know if we have bacon. And this should actually say, and mayo. So if there's bacon and mayo, make a BLT. Otherwise, make peanut butter and jelly. So it's arguable that that second approach of having the nested ones is a little bit easier to read and follow. Like I said before, there are lots of different ways to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and code this one. This is especially because I've shown you how to write sequential, independent things like this before. But I also, independent's the wrong word. This is actually all, one unit really, because you've got if, else, if, else, if, else. And we looked at an example of that in the last tutorial. But let's look at this nested conditionals. That's what I really want to focus on. So let's go down to here, and I've got a couple new variables, have bacon equals true, have mayo equals true. And we are going to kind of experiment with this. We'll write the logic and then we'll change the values up like we've been doing to make sure we can test the different outcomes. That's something you always want to do when you have lots of multiple conditions and multiple outcomes. So following along with this pseudocode, we're going to start with if there is ham or turkey. So have ham or have turkey. And I'm gonna structure the outer part of this first, the first level. I'm gonna say we either have ham or turkey or we don't. So inside here, now I've indented in again, and I'm gonna write another if block here and say if have bacon. Then we're gonna do something else. We'll do something else. And then here in the second block, we'll say if have bacon and have mayo, then we will, console log something there. Otherwise, we'll console log this. So all 4 of our outcomes now, we have logic in place to make them print depending on what the values of have ham, have turkey, have bacon, and have mayo are. Those are the 4 different Booleans we'll use to determine this logic. Okay, so let me actually put these statements in here. Console.log. I'm making a ham and turkey. Oh, sorry, that should be, I'm making a club sandwich because it can be ham or turkey. Okay. And then otherwise, we might have ham or turkey, but we don't have bacon. So we're going to say, no bacon. I'm making a regular deli sandwich. Can't make a club without bacon. Okay. All right, so we've taken care of the case where we do have some deli meat. Now let's come down here and take care of the case where we don't. This is where we can make a BLT, but only if we have bacon and mayo. Otherwise, we're not interested in that. So if we do, I'll say I'm making a BLT. Yum. Okay, and then the last option is if all else fails, peanut, butter, and jelly is, oh well, right? Okay, so let's test this out. And we know we have bacon and mayo, so we could say, this right now with those values, this could possibly be true. But we also have this logic here first that has to be evaluated because we decided that was our top priority. We would rather have a club sandwich first. So we're going to check to see if we have deli meat first. Okay. Yeah, and it says I'm making a club sandwich. And I forgot to add this little thing in. I'm going to add that in. Okay. I'm making a club sandwich because we do have turkey. Now, let's go ahead and change that to false. Oh, I don't need the let again because it already exists. I just need to reassign it. There we go. Have turkey equals false. So let's temporarily change that just for testing purposes and run it again. Yeah, now we're going to be making a BLT because we don't have ham, we don't have turkey. So it's going to bypass this entire thing and we don't even evaluate either of those possibilities. It goes straight to this else, and then it starts checking here. Do we have bacon and mayo? And if we have both, we'll make the BLT. Now, what if we were to change this to say, we don't have bacon? And let's go back and actually just say that we do have turkey. So we have turkey, this is true. We don't have bacon. Now we're going to try to see if we can get this response. That's what we're hoping for. No bacon, I'm making a regular deli sandwich. Good, so this worked the way we expected. And now let's go back and put this back in play where we don't have turkey, so it's going to come back down here. And we don't have bacon. Even if we have mayo, this is going to return false, right? So we're going to end up with peanut butter and jelly. Let's run it. Peanut butter and jelly it is. Okay, so we have good solid logic. It's very well structured. It's easy to read. And that is, one way to set this whole thing up. So here's what I'm going to do. I want you to pause the video. And I want you to, well, let me tell you about this first. But then down here, I want you to actually take some time to think this through, different ways that you could approach the logic for this problem and see what you come up with. And then I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you could do it. And it's very possible that you've built a really, really good conditional, or series of conditionals or nested conditionals that meet the needs of this problem, but still might be different from what I show you. So don't overthink it, just kind of, think through your logic. Here's the criteria. And again, this may or may not be based on personal experience of mine. So write a conditional to determine whether your kitten's boredom level is high enough, but you must resort to building them a fort out of cardboard boxes to keep them from interrupting your Zoom meetings. This is a purely hypothetical situation, of course. If there are less than 3 balls per kitten, and there's a poor chance, and I'll qualify or quantify that as less than 65%, a poor chance of a kitten-sized WrestleMania event taking place in the next room, you definitely need to build a fort. So all of this depends on the kittens being awake. So to recap, you're going to use some console log statements and print results for each possible outcome. If you need to build a fort, if you don't because they're sufficiently occupied, or if you don't because they're asleep. And there are so many different ways, like I said, to do this. So just start somewhere and see what you come up with. I've given you some values here for things. So we'll say you have at least 2 kittens that we're going to start out by saying they're not asleep. And we're going to say that we have a total number of 5 balls. And the chance of WrestleMania is 60%. So this is a decimal, so 0.60. You can, write your logic after you think this through, and then change up these values a few times to test it out, just like we did above when we were testing all, to make sure each outcome is what you expect. So, start here and write your code. And then when you're ready, come back and I will kind of show you a couple of the options that I came up with. Okay, so here is the first approach that I decided to take. I decided to start with, are they asleep or not? That's kind of the bigger basis that I'm going to go off of. And I'm going to start with, I want to kind of dig right away into the evaluation of whether they're occupied enough, or not. So I'm going to actually start with a negative case for our sleepyheads and say if they are not sleepy, meaning they're awake, then I want to handle, all the possibilities if they're awake. Else, we will, just say that they're too sleepy to, for me to even worry about whether I can make them a fort or not. And I'll just say they are so cute when they're curled up, sleeping like that. Okay. So now let's come up here because this is where the more complex logic is. And I decided to do a nested conditional here. And I thought, okay, let's take care of what happens based on whether they're occupied enough or, with wrestling or playing with their balls. So this is the more complex logic that we'll do first. And then we'll say else. And we can, say, they're not occupied, so they'll keep themselves busy. And I know I'm doing this kind of backwards, but it's because I'm working my way towards the more complex stuff. So I'm kind of, ruling things out. Looks like they'll be keeping themselves busy for a while. Okay, so I misspoke earlier. This is the case where they are occupied. So we're going to actually test the case here where they're not occupied and we do need to build the fort. That's what we're doing. Okay. So in order to evaluate that, we need to say, we had criteria here that said there have to be, less than 3 balls per kitten. That's the first half in order for you to build a fort. So let's do that part and we'll say the number of fuzzy balls divided by the number of kittens is less than 3. And just make sure that we are, testing that criteria properly. And then we have a second expression that we need to evaluate, 2 conditions, right? Because the second one was about this, chance of kitten WrestleMania. So we can use this variable here that we set up and say, okay, and the chance of WrestleMania is less than 0.65. So if there's a pretty poor chance that they're in the mood to wrestle, if both of those things are true, then they are not going to occupy themselves. We need to build a fort. Better go get a box knife and a large roll of wrapping tape or packing tape or whatever. Yeah, let's say packing tape. That makes more sense. Okay, for boxes. Okay, so let's revisit this logic from the top. We're basically saying, first, let's check and see if they're sleepy. If they're not, then we need to say, okay, they're awake. Are they engaged enough with their toys or wrestling with one another or whatever? And if they're not, if both of these things fail, then we're going to build them a fort. Otherwise, we're going to say, hey, they're keeping themselves busy for a while. And if they are sleepy, so if this entire thing up here evaluated to false, if they not our sleepy heads was false, then we'll say they're really cute when they're sleeping because they're asleep. Okay, so that's the first one. Let's run it to see how it works. And we came up with better go get a box knife and a large roll of packing tape because there was only 5 balls, which is less than 3 per kitten. And this, decimal here is less than 0.65. If I were to change this to 7 and change this one to 80%, then we would expect that we can, say that looks like they'll be keeping themselves busy for a while. Let's change those back. And let's change this one instead to say that they are sleepyheads, and then we'll check to see if we can get this option down here. Yep, they're so cute when they're curled up sleeping like that. So, this logic is working where, it checked this first and said, actually, this evaluates to false. So we need to come down here to this else block. And again, the use of indenting here is really important for being able to tell. If I was back here like this, you would have a hard time reading this on the fly and seeing, what's nested inside what. So really pay close attention to that. And when you get in the real world, your bosses are going to expect you to code like this. So get in the habit now of doing that. I just realized I missed a semicolon, same thing. Get in the habit of doing that too. Okay, so that's one approach. Let's look at an alternate approach. So this time I'm not going to use nested conditionals. I'm going to just use a series, and you may have done it this way. So I'll say, if they are sleepyheads, let's start with the, case that they are just asleep and we don't even need to go any further than that. Then we can console log. They're so cute. Else if, and we'll just, go on to the next one. And this is where we actually check for this condition here. Do they have not enough balls and, aren't in the mood to wrestle? And then we'll say, better go get a box knife or packing tape. Oops, let me grab that entire thing with the semicolon. And then the last possibility is, they're going to be keeping themselves busy. Okay, so we can kind of see that while this is a different approach, it is very straightforward, and it just follows one right after the other. If this one is false, then it moves on to this one. And if that entire thing is false, it moves on to this one. So we'll test them. We should always test them. Let's run it. Okay, and we do get this, they're so cute when they're curled up sleeping because this is still true. So let's change this to false. And now we see that we're consistently getting the same result. Yeah, that we do need to build a fort. And then we can, check this one again by pushing these both up above the limits we set. Yep, and now they're plenty busy because both of these things evaluated is true. Okay, so you have seen now how you really can take a variety of approaches, and there's just a lot of, just kind of depends on how you think and where you start with your logic. And sometimes it just doesn't matter which is which, as long as you have things sequenced in a logical way. So, every time you go to solve one of these problems, I definitely encourage you. I didn't show you how to do this again down here, but I definitely encourage you to take the time to pseudocode things, to just write out your logic so that you're not trying to do it all in your head. And then once you have what you think is a good sequence, or, in this case, a good structure, then, you can come down and code it and kind of use these as your notes for how to do that. And it'll probably help you not get frustrated when you're thinking through something that's more complex. So I hope this has been helpful. And I